Hi, welcome to the inspiring interview. Today's guest is an artist, I've loved for ages, actually. A northerner like myself. It's Dale Grimshaw. Hi, Dale. How you doing?
Hi, good evening. Early evening, very early evening.
Early evening, yes. Yeah, it's a nice piece that you've got behind you as well.
Yes, it wasn't planned. I didn't realise. Yeah, for decades I've said, I don't like living with my own work, and I don't do. It's not that I hate it. It's just I tend to look at it and see things that I want to take to alter. But this is one of the things. I've got it behind me, so I can't see it. So it's quite a lovely piece. I don't mind saying so myself.
Yeah, it's a beautiful one.
An oil painting. Yeah, I did it for an art fair, but it's quite a big piece. It's one of the few pieces got left behind, so I claimed it for myself. Which
I'm going to ask you about your work in a moment, but obviously you got a show coming up at the Wellhung Gallery, Assembly of the Gods. You've exhibited there quite a few times now, actually. You seem to have a good relationship with those guys.
Yeah. I've worked with them, but they've put up with me for a few years now. So, I don't know, maybe 4 years, 3 years. It was funny. I was reading an article years ago about networking, and it was like some power networking article, and the general kind of gist of the article, what I remember, was work with people you like, and because it always works out the best. And I was like, well, that's fucking common sense. Sorry, I'm allowed to swear.
Oh, yes, you're
oh, right.
Not the BBC.
Well, but I'm a bit like that anyway. You just get a feeling for people, don't you? And if you like people and there's a bit of rapport and you trust them, you just naturally want to work with them again. And I think it was a little bit like that with the Wellhung people. So it's nice when you meet people and there's that natural kind of organic feel to working, which we have. So, but I'm sure I drive them a bit mad.
The thing is, though, I think you're right, because people underestimate the importance of that, don't they? The fact that you can build a strong relationship, and this, so you just know how each other work. You can just go to and say, look, this isn't working for me. Have an open, honest conversation.
Yeah, it's invaluable. I mean, I'm not a corporate kind of person in every shape and every form, so I can't really do that whole kind of fake kind of thing. It just is not me, and I'd really struggle to do it. If I don't like people, I sometimes, I don't know. It's hard for me sometimes to hide
straightforward.
Yeah, and but I'm not in that world where I have to do that, so it's nice. I just like people that are just a bit more shooting straight.
Was there ever a time you did try to go into the corporate world or anything like that? I mean,
not really. I mean, when you're traveling and things, I use that word corporate, but there's people in the art world, in the street art scene, who have, and I'm not mentioning names because it seems like it's a bad thing, but they do it well. But there are people that have that very professional, very articulate, middle class kind of corporate way of communicating, and it doesn't really work for me. I mean, I've been to Oxford and Cambridge, but I just can't pull it off in conversation. So I'm just myself, me, myself, and I.
So tell me about the show then, Assembly of the Gods. What's it about, and what are we gonna what's this body of work about?
Well, it's been a weird time, hasn't it, with COVID? So I've been working solidly before COVID, but it's been quite intense over the last kind of 5 months or whatever it is. We've all been trapped in our houses. It's a collection, really. I've got about 6 signature pieces, which are oil paintings, which is my studio kind of go-to kind of medium, the oil paintings. But then I've been doing some, I wanted to really loosen up because the oil paintings were I love doing them and I love the oils, but sometimes some of the energy that I like in my work, the kind of brush energy and can sometimes get a little bit kind of pedestrian with the paintings, So with this show, I've got the signature pieces, but then I've also got a lot of oil sketches where I actually just got I cleaned my grandma's house out. She died of Alzheimer's not long ago. And I found this really cheap blue makeup brush from Accrington Market. I imagine it was Accrington Market because everything in my grand's house came. And I took it because she wore a lot of makeup. She was known as the painted lady. So when I was going to do these oil sketches, I just used my grand's kind of fan brush and I glooped it in, and I just basically, oh, the drum is off that I was telling you about earlier. I may have to go and strangle them. So I just really did some very gestural marks and then put the detailed painting into the kind of abstract marks. And it's hard to explain, but it worked really well. And I've tried to get this energy and this kind of scratchy, chaotic bush marks for a while, and I've never really known how to achieve it. So I'm going off on a geek tangent here, I know. Unless you oil paint, you'll find me extremely boring. But my grand's blue electric makeup brush, Amaki Market, was the perfect thing. So I've done a collection of those oil sketches, and for the first in a long while, I've done some charcoal on paper, which again, I'm not really a charcoal person, but I always try and kind of push things. And even though people might look at work and say, oh, that's definitely Dale's work, I try and just take it somewhere else a little bit and try new things. And I've already kind of got new ideas for another show. So I'm full of nervous energy most of the time. So
first of all, I love the fact that you're using your grandma's old fan from Accrington.
Yeah.
I mean, that is ace.
Yeah. Well, it'd be quite appropriate because if you met her or you'd seen her, she was quite extreme looking, and unfortunately, people back in the day did used to spit at my gran, and she was attacked because she just looked quite extreme. She just looked like a mix between like Cleopatra, Susie Sue, just very extreme makeup, made her own clothes. But you can imagine living in Accrington, people didn't really.
Was she ahead of her time, really? You think?
Yeah, she was ahead of her time, and I think she was really destined. I think if she'd have been from a different background, or decades to come in the future, she'd probably move to London like me. But yeah, she looked really extreme. I mean, an example because I was caring for her, she had Alzheimer's, and one of the staff at the care home, they said, "Oh, we get it," because my gran had never had a shower because she lived in this little cottage on the kind of way out, and she just had a little bath and things. So they finally got her into the shower, and the care staff said, "Your grandma's got her eyebrows tattooed on." And I was like, "Oh, right, nice one, Gran." I mean, it was a bit of a shock to me, but that is just my gran. Back in the 80s, she'd had these big Boy George, like boomerang eyebrows on, and they totally freaked. The poor care staff were obviously scrubbing away at my gran's eyebrows and couldn't get them off. But I remember her asking me a lot about tattooing when I was into the punk thing. She was all, and I used to think, why is my gran? In the 80s, she kept asking me about tattooing and facial tattooing. And I wondered, but decades later.
And that was it?
And that was it. She'd obviously gone and had her eyebrows tattooed on.
So yeah, my Dale says.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that was my little input. So yeah, it was quite important, the blue brush, but yeah.
So it sounds like I was struck by what you're saying. When you were trying that you said you wanted to make a chaotic feel, like put your sort of fine art perhaps onto a chaotic background. What was the thought behind the chaos that you wanted to create there? What was that?
Well, not necessarily a chaos, just a spontaneity, but it is a chaos because when you just mix up a big gloop of kind of whatever, burnt umber or black or whatever, and I was almost closing my eyes sometimes. It's just really trying to loosen up, because what happens sometimes, and it happens with the murals, when you've got this really pristine and expensive canvas, I naturally kind of tighten up. So what I did, I just bought these like pad of, they call it oil paper, so it's quite durable, but it's inexpensive. So immediately you're loosening yourself up. You're not kind of like, oh, this has got to be the best thing I've ever done. So I was just kind of glooping my grand's bush into these lumps of paint and just closing my eyes almost. And then I worked the detail in. But a lot of it's like my personality. It's like most of us. It's a mix of many things that kind of, I don't know, that precious kind of perfectionist side. And then there's the chaotic kind of side, maybe a bit of punk rock in there. So it's and I like that coming together, that confluence of these two, the tightness and the looseness, and I find that quite interesting.
And what about the subject matter of the pieces? I want to ask you a bit more about this, but within Assembly of the Gods, who was depicted?
Well, for a few years now, I've been painting a lot of people of colour. So I've got a lead attacking me behind me. Hang on. Yeah, for a few years now. I mean, I've always painted people. I've always painted human beings. So to me, they're really just figurative paintings. But obviously, there's more to it than just that. But one of the main concerns is to make interesting, passionate paintings that are full of energy and colour and emotion. But also there's the indigenous political side. So for a few years now, I've been painting a lot of people from Papua New Guinea. And I've always been interested in a lot of indigenous, especially when I was a kid, the Native American, imagery and things. So it's just linking back to that, and some of the color and the energy in the face paint. It comes back to the kind of punk thing as well. And not a lot of people pick up that kind of DIY approach to kind of body modification and body painting. So it's a lot of things thrown in, but the political side of the work is even though a lot of the people I paint are from Papua New Guinea, I use the paintings and the murals to talk about the Free West Papua campaign. So on one side, you've got the island of Papua New Guinea, but on the other side, there's literally a line down the middle, like the Berlin Wall. And on the the west side of the island is the West Papuans, they like to refer to themselves, but they've been colonized by the Indonesians, and there's a big gold mine there, and BP paid the Indonesians as well to extract a lot of liquid gas. So what happens is the indigenous people there are just basically killed and murdered on a daily basis. And no, I'm not being dramatic there. It's quite nasty what happens, but I'm just helping spread that message in a way, and the Indonesians are very, I'm surprised they haven't hacked my Instagram account yet. No joke, because they take criticism very seriously and they really don't take kindly to it. And they try and suppress any information coming out, imagery of dead people and murdered people. So I've just been using a lot of the imagery from Papua New Guinea because they're all Melanesian people, but using it as well to promote some of the political things that are going in the west of the island that a lot of people don't know about. So yeah, and it fits back into some of the things I've been interested in for decades now, like with the punk scene and that more anarcho-punk scene where we're touching on the environment and animal rights and nuclear war and all these kind of like 80s subjects, but they've always been quite prevalent for me anyway. So it's not a new thing. Even though, I've only been painting the indigenous people for about 5 years now. It's not a new thing in my life. It's a subject and a kind of concern and a concept that has kind of been running throughout what I do for many years now. So, yeah.
What was the hook then?
The environment.
Yeah, yes. I mean, environmental, you can see how that is a common thread throughout what you do, that
yeah.
So just by the nature of what you paint. But what was the hook? What drew you to that the West Papua and the Free West Papua campaign in the first place?
Well, it was really unusual because normally it was totally opposite how I found out about the Free West Papua campaign, because normally I'm the kind of person that will watch a documentary for half an hour or a lyric sheet or read a pamphlet, and then I rant at people for 2 hours on a soapbox. But it was totally opposite to that. It was quite natural how I found out about West Papua. I didn't even know about it. It was all new to me, and I can't even remember where the springboard came. But I was like, oh, I didn't know about this. And I've just over time, I've naturally been learning about it and then using this opportunity like this, to talk about it. But I think there's always that, I always get that feeling that, people kind of want more, but I'm not an artist like Damien Hirst or Jeff Koons. I haven't got a big cartel of designers and hairdressers and coke dealers and PR people. All I've got is myself and my art and my voice and my spray can and my paintbrush. So I've been trying to create amazing paintings and spread a message at the same time and try and help people. It's just about it's really an anti-bullying campaign,
Mm.
because, you know, there's all these fancy terminology about, you know, you could use colonialism or, you know, but really it's one person or one group of people trying to suppress and bully another group of people. That's really what it comes down to. And we need to start learning to get on and respect the environment and respect each other. So yeah, there you go. That's you told.
Do you think, you know, particularly with the street art, you know, because
Yeah.
you paint these Papua New Guinean people big, bold, colourful,
Yeah.
bright, and powerful, massive
Yeah.
walls in big cities. I mean, does it have an impact? Do people start to
Yeah,
look
it
at that and
does.
think more about the campaign?
It's hard, really. I mean, it certainly helped create awareness now, because I remember a few years ago, people were kind of like, "Oh, they'd tell West Papua, is that a country? Where's that?" As we're now on the scene, people are all very. I know I've had some effect, really, you know, but whether you know, I don't know. You can't force people really to kind of. It's just making people aware, and in a way that has. And I've over the decades, I've seen, like I was saying with the punk scene. You know, there was a lot of stuff now that young people on the internet take for granted, whether it's veganism or environmental concerns, that seemed kind of quite obscure at the time, but now these, you know, these campaigns and this terminology like veganism. I mean, when I was like 13, if somebody said, you know, there'll be people with man buns and tight trousers hanging around the world, but protesting about more vegan burgers, I'd have been really puzzled. But it just illustrates my point. How, you know, you keep chipping away, and eventually, you know, things do become a bit more mainstream and a bit more of a light, you know, cast on them. And yeah, we just need more of the media involved and things. But with the big paintings, I kind of like the idea as well that, I guess it's a bit like that punk thing as well, where, you know, you would kind of walk down the street and people would kind of look at you, you know, your 15-foot spikes, and kind of go, "God," you know, like, what planet is he, or what you come as, love. So it's kind of, I like the idea. I remember painting in Camden a few years ago. There was some woman coming up the road with her shopping bags, and she just, with her Sainsbury's shopping bags, and she was, I could just see her kind of trying to work out. But I quite like the idea there's these people that still live almost with primitive technology in some areas, you know, very obscure, very isolated people, that they're just there and on the high street in London. I kind of like that juxtaposition, you know, of ideas, and it kind of throws. But I've also been in countries where, one country in particular I won't mention because I don't want, but, you know, where people clearly did have an issue with an issue with me painting people of color. And I had a bit of an argument with one lady. I even got off the lift and punched her in the face. She was about 95, but I didn't care. No, I'm joking. She was very angry, and she was obviously from that very fascist. Yeah, I'm not going to go into it, but
Gosh.
yeah, and it was quite heated. And but to answer your question, a lot of the time it wins people over.
Mm.
In some areas, people are like, "What? Excuse me, what are you doing? Are you allowed to do that? Why are you doing that?" And then the next day they kind of wave to you, and then the day after they've got your little cup of espresso or something. And
That's nice.
it's about winning people
Yeah.
over. And that's the emotion that comes back to the emotion in the pieces. Because if they were just cartoon works, not that there's anything wrong with cartoon works, but because of the emotional impact of the pieces, they communicate with people, and the detail as well, and the emotional energy. So I get that a lot. I mean, it's quite common for a lot of street artists, but I've seen it in one particular country. I saw it quite an extreme level where people had a problem with the subject matter, but then seem to be won over really by the painting. And that's nice to see, because you're talking to people's hearts really, rather than all these ideas that are going on, assumptions in their head.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing that really strikes about, because it is easy to start a conversation when you look at your work, because people are curious, and I suppose it comes back to this, you know, does it have an impact or not? But the very fact that you're doing it means that it has an impact, and the fact that people walk past and might think, what's
yeah,
that?
yeah,
It's a powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, I like that because I used to be involved in a gallery, so I kind of got a good idea, you know, maybe it's changed over the last few years, but I got a good idea what the kind of people were coming in. And what's nice is when you're painting outside that you do get across to a lot of people that wouldn't dare go into a gallery. And you think I'm exaggerating, but it's true. But they'll quite happily stop the pram or stop with the shopping bags. And you end up chatting with people that wouldn't identify with the art world or being an art fan. They would feel it was very out of their reach or arm's length from them, and I kind of like that. And there's a lot of artists who use headphones when they paint, but I don't always like doing that because it sometimes it gives off this like vibe of exclusivity.
What's
and
the
I
barrier
don't
between, do you think?
Yeah, it's scary, and I didn't really want that. Of course, sometimes I listen to a lot of drum and bass and things, but I like my music quite loud and things. But I don't like the idea that it stops people coming to chat and things, which is quite important. Because when you go into people's neighborhoods, it's quite arrogant, isn't it? If you just go in, and a lot of artists do it. They go and they paint their own thing. They have their headphones on. They don't really want to talk to anybody, and then they just whatever get back on the train and fuck off out of people's neighborhoods. And I think the least you can do is kind of just to build up a bit of a rapport, really, and have a bit of respect for people's neighborhoods as well, you know. And yeah, there's that element. So yeah.
You mentioned a few things earlier. You've mentioned being a punk a couple of times.
Yeah.
Is that something that you still associate with? And just tell me more about that part of your life.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I don't see myself as a punk anymore, but I like the energy of that. And it was, I learned quite a lot about the world through punk record covers and punk lyric sheets. So yeah, and that energy, I still like that energy. And it's a bit more back in fashion punk now. There was a time probably in the 90s when there was the rave thing and drum and bass and a lot of electric, and it was a bit of a dirty word. And now all the bands have reformed and everybody has been a punk forever, but it wasn't always like that. But it's nice now that, like I was saying about some of the more political side as well, that that's kind of become mainstream. You know, some of that more I hate that word, but like left wing or kind of a bit libertarian. Some of those ideas are kind of you know, part of our everyday kind of vocabulary. You know, so but yeah, I still like the energy of punk and, you know, the kind of still like the imagery and the energy, and I'm a bit kind of stuck in a bit of a time warp with that. But you know, it reminds you of an age where everything's exciting as well. When you're 13 and you've got like a Discharge or a GBH cover or Crass, it's really exciting. Just this piece of, you know, plastic wrapped in a piece of cardboard with the lyrics and the imagery. It's, you know, it reminds you of a time where everything's really quite new and quite innocent and exciting. Because as you get older, you just get bolder and fatter and jaded, and that's just the women. Yeah, and you kind of become a bit jaded with it all. But it kind of reminds me of that energy. And sometimes when I'm feeling a bit kind of like, I sometimes play a lot of the early punk stuff because it takes me back. They say about senses, about smell, takes you straight back, like memories. But sometimes songs do.
Yeah.
You know, I listen to a lot of early Adam and the Ants and stuff, and they remind me of being like 10, 9, 10, and kind of thinking, where is London? What's, you know, who's Vivian and Malcolm? Who are the Sex Pistols? And all these kind of exciting ideas. So it's trying to tap into that maybe as an older person. And music can still do that. So yeah, long live music.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like, you know, your early years, you know, growing up, you're trying new things all the time. You're trying to find a voice in the world. I mean, you mentioned CND, you've mentioned the sort of environmental campaigns. Were you the sort of person that was sort of just, you know, trying to get involved, just wanting to make a difference at that early stage in your life?
Yeah, it was. I mean, when I was really young, because I lived in quite a small town, it was everything. It feels like it was kind of it was just like the world was kind of something that always was happening at a distance somewhere else. I mean, living in little Clarence Road in Accrington in our council house, you know, it was the only access to your world was like Top of the Pops and things, so yeah, it was hard when I was really young because I'd lived in such a small place, and I really thought I would kind of live and die there. I felt very small. And I guess kind of that's where the writing on bus stops and things, that kind of stealing markers from Woolworths and writing my name on bus stops and things, where that comes back to, you know, trying to find a voice because it gives you a voice, you know, and I like that energy and that voice of punk and the graffiti and lots of these quite big, loud movements, you know, they kind of, and sometimes I think with the artwork as well, people, I don't think, and it's something I forget, but it's something I think people overlook is sometimes when I paint these characters, I'm like it's like they're like superheroes in a way. I'm painting these big warriors, these defiant, proud warriors, and I'm trying to like inspire myself. They're like superheroes. I'm kind of thinking I need to be like that. I need to be more of a warrior, and so I try. And a lot of it is trying to inspire yourself, you know, to create and. But yeah, certainly. And then as time went on, became more aware, yeah, with the punk thing of the more political side. Yeah, and that was very different, you know, like vegetarianism and things, because my dad would brag about getting a big chunk of horse meat cheap from the abattoir and things like that. It was just so alien, and so even the idea of not eating meat was kind of, and even that was a kind of weird thing to do. But yeah, I persevered. I'm a warrior.
It's quite, I suppose, yeah. You don't think it's quite, probably? Would you say it's quite revolutionary back in those days to make in Accrington to?
Well, it certainly seems for me. I remember being in hospital when I was about 14. I'm not going into details, but it was a bit messy. And the nurses, I was trying to tell them I don't really eat meat and things, and I remember them like kind of saying he's a vegetarian. They were kind of circling around the bed like I had two heads. So you know, it was kind of like I said, you know, this is everyday kind of terminology, you know, but people, especially with my background as well, coming from that more kind of working class background, it wasn't I didn't really know any I didn't know any artists, you know, I didn't know any of that. It was very different to where I was from. So yeah, but I like the idea of just trying something new. I'll try anything twice. That's what I say. Yeah.
You know, going back to those streets of Accrington, and you said that you got the mark and you're doing your tagging and stuff like that. What we now know as tagging. I don't know if you might have known it as tagging then.
Exactly. Yes.
But so you're doing that. Obviously, you're trying to express yourself on the street. You've probably got a latent talent in art as well. How do you move that to graffiti and then to what you do now in terms of the?
Well, it's always been separate worlds. I mean, this is what's really been good over the last kind of 10, 15 years in England, in England with the street art scene or the urban art scene or graffiti scene, whatever terminology you want to use. It seems to have brought all these different styles together now, as where years ago it was, you had your fine art, you know. I mean, back then I would do like a little oil pastel of some still life from my gran and with a makeup gran. The painted lady, she was called to people. So I do a little oil pastel still life, and she said, "Oh, you're such a sweet boy." She didn't know I was kind of writing Dale G on almost every bus stop that stayed still long enough. But again, it came back to that voice, and there were two worlds. There was like the fine art side, and then that kind of not criminal side, that kind of vandalism. I kind of like destroying things. I like breaking windows. And so I was always a sweet, sensitive boy, but then I had that chaotic side where I'd like to kind of I like the sound of breaking glass and things. I was a strange child. But yeah, no, with this scene, it's brought everything together and it's mixed there's none of these rules really anymore, and I really like that. It's quite liberating. So you can mix in, you could do a canvas and you can have a bit of calligraphy bleeding in, and then there's some quite traditional oil painting, and you might have some impasto texture, and there's a kind of, and I remember being, when I came to London at Middlesex Uni, mixing up kind of lettering and things, and I remember people kind of a bit like, oh, that idea hasn't really got any legs. It's funny, isn't it, how that whole mix of the two worlds, the graph and the fine art, seem to work quite well if you get the balance right. So it's nice, because I'm quite greedy really with art materials. I want to try everything, whether it's lino cut or spray paint, oil paint, airbrush. I really like the idea of just grabbing it all and making a mess.
Just seeing what happens. Yeah.
Exactly.
And did you go into would you have ever considered yourself a writer? Did you ever go into that particular?
No, I'm not from that scene. No. I'd say I didn't really know. Again, I didn't really know about that world. I didn't. I'd heard of America, but that whole hip hop thing that came probably arrived in somewhere like Manchester was probably maybe the mid-80s. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was going to school, and some of the first graffiti I ever saw was going to St. Peter's, and I remember there were two guys. They were like twins, and they had, I guess it was like that Ramones haircut, but they looked like they had a German helmet. They were quite strange, if I remember. And they were really into this band called the Stranglers, as I found out years later. So I was walking to school, and there was this big bus stop up Ferngoy in Accrington, and somebody had written, I don't know if you know the font, it's like a handwritten calligraphy, and somebody just wrote in huge letters, "The Stranglers," and it just blew my mind, and I didn't really know what a strangler was, but I liked the idea that somebody had come and done this in the night and not got caught. So I remember asking my mum or a teacher, and I said, "What's a strangler?" And they said, "Oh, don't be so gruesome. Why do you ask a silly question like that?" It was kind of like that, but it made me more intrigued. So I became obsessed with like the Boston Strangler and Stranglers. And because the minute somebody said, "Don't talk about that's gruesome," why would a little boy like you want it? Kind of made me want to get books out of the library. And so that was some of the first graffiti I saw, but it was always centered around, Maggie Out or the Sex Pistols or Support the Miners or the Damned. There was a lot of that. So when people spoke about hip hop culture and things, I really like a lot of that, the imagery of it, but it didn't really mean a lot to me when I was this shy little effeminate boy back in Accrington. I didn't know anything about Grandmaster Flash, so I don't know.
And literally someone just were the Stranglers, so you didn't even know they were a band. You just thought it was cool.
None at the time, no. When I asked an adult, it was the act of taking somebody's life. They said, "Don't be a gruesome little morbid creature." But obviously, as I got more into music and things, and Top of the Pops was like a window to the world, where you'd see the UK soaps, or Susie and the Banshees, Stranglers. You'd have all these bands, Adam and the Ants. I started to learn kind of quite a lot from that as well. So, yeah, but that was some of my first graffiti. So it was quite exciting. It was almost like a kind of, I don't know, like when I first saw graffiti, it was almost like there was this crime, this mystery. It really made me think, who's done it? Why have they done it? What does it mean? Why would you do that? And it kind of set off all these kind of weird ideas. And I still like some of that mystery now, which I like some of the, old school graffiti. I like the idea people still just do big pink bubble letters on a bus stop when nobody's looking. I still like that kind of energy, and yeah.
And you seem to have a thing for bus stops as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
there seems to be a running theme of
I need to do it. Yeah. I've mentioned the word bus stop and blue makeup brush. Yeah. But that was, mum, when I was brought by my mum, I didn't speak on the telephone till I was about 17. We didn't have a car, we didn't have a telephone in the house, so we just got buses everywhere. There were just bus stops were kind of, they were quite an important kind of part of my life, really. And again, you had that graffiti, Debbie P is a slut by everybody else. You'd always, and then whoever poor Debbie P was, she'd cross it out and say, "No, I'm not," or whatever. And you would have that kiddish that conversation going on. Quite a lot happened at bus stops, you know, don't knock it. But yeah, but yeah, we didn't have a car. We didn't have access to any of that. So a lot of public transport was a big part of my life, really, when I was a kid. So yeah.
When did you sort of when did you move out of Accrington and sort of come down here? What was that?
Well, I moved to Blackburn first. I thought it was like moving to New York City when I went up to Blackburn. But yeah, I moved to London in the early 90s. Yeah, my mum died when I was about 19, and it was kind of a bit of a turning point for me. I kind of realized that it was time to go. Really, there was a lot of bad memories and a lot of, it was time to move on. And as I'd said, I'd read about the Sex Pistols and Malcolm McLaren, Adam and the Ants. So I came to give London a bit of a try, to be honest. So, and here I am.
London via Blackburn.
Yes.
You've got a piece in Blackburn as well, I think, actually, haven't you?
Yeah, it was really good. They invited me back. It was really nice. It was funny enough. It was a wall just near where I used to hang out, you know, where there was a few kind of rock pubs, and it's all been knocked down. So it was really exciting, really. But it was bonkers painting up there because everybody's kind of quite loud. Even when it was raining, there were people pottering around in a shirt and t-shirt shouting at me, "Mate, top one banging." And it was in London, people can be a bit jaded and a bit too cool for school, but kind of over there. And there was some on a serious note as well. I was really aware of kind of how much drugs and unemployment there was. And that was quite sad to see, to come back and hang out on the streets for like 4 days. You really got a sense of what some of these small towns up the north of England are dealing, well, all over, but in particularly, you know, the north and Tyneside, and on the other side, Cumbria and Lancashire. There's a hell of a lot of really bad vibes, a lot of drugs around, same in Blackpool as well, you know, and it's quite sad to see, really. And it only seems like it's going to get worse, really, with the Brexit thing and
oh gosh, yeah,
the xenophobia that is kind of bouncing around in high doses at the minute.
I know what you mean. I thought the same myself. I've been to Blackburn a few times to see, your mural, the rest of the murals as part of Open
did
Walls.
You see it?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's a cracker. Brilliant. And I know exactly the wall. I've walked past it a few times. But you look at those towns and Blackburn and Rochdale and places like that, and there's clearly an issue with things like drugs and unemployment and things like that, and there's not a lot of investment being made. And I just hope, maybe I'm being too aspirational, but things like the street art, I do see people looking at walls like yours in that spot in Blackburn, taking a little bit of time, noticing it, and appreciating their town a little bit more, because someone like you has gone in and created something like that. Yeah,
it does. It does. If you get a good street art piece, or whatever you want to call it, a good mural, it does create. People do take ownership of it, and not just. I mean, with my stuff, you get it a lot because of the emotional side. People do get quite emotionally involved in the pieces. But they do, and it's really lovely that people say, "This is our mural. This was done for us," and I love to see that kind of pride and that kind of I can't think of it, just ownership, really. Yes. And that's why people get a bit upset. Sometimes people don't always understand the scene, so when the work gets painted over, it does upset people because they don't always understand why it needs to be destroyed or painted over. But yeah, I love that. I kind of love it, and I'd really like to do more, particularly in the north. I've done Manchester and Blackburn. I'd like to do more because it's like Madonna playing, Detroit back in '88 when she made all her fame and fortune. It was like, Detroit, welcome home. So it always is nice when you go up north and kind of paint and chat to just ordinary people, and
then because I suppose you might think of street art as a little bit of a suburban type London thing. But then, when you introduce it into northern towns and you hear someone like yourself talk, clearly a northern man, I suppose that connection with the local communities becomes even more strong, doesn't it? When you
and people like a story to it. Exactly, it's like when people buy art as well. Sometimes they like to hear the story behind it, where the idea is, if there's any videos of you making the piece, the whole history around it. And it's the same with street art. People, they have memories and they become part of the story. When I was painting in Broccoli about 4 years ago, I did the Bring Back. I tend not to do celebs and things, but it was the Bring Back Bob campaign, which was on TV the other night, when Bob Marley came to Britain documentary. But that was really interesting because when I was painting, because there'd been a little 70s Bob Marley stencil just across the road from where my piece was painted, the Bob Marley piece, but it had been knocked down. Some Boris flats, a property developer come along to build the Boris flats, and it really upset the locals. So when I was painting the piece, all these 20, whatever, 30-year-olds were coming up chatting to me, and they said, but I was like 7 when the guy did the stencil back in 79 or whatever it was. So it was really interesting seeing this. And they were saying, well, my kid here, I was their age when, the mural you're replacing in a way was first done in whatever, 79, 80. So it really illustrates the point of that stories and about how it involves the community. And that's kind of quite important with street art. And, but yeah, there was got a lot of emotions flying around. It was almost like a brought back Bob's corpse at one point. People were really tearful, and because it's a very working class black area, it was really important for them, and the piece worked out really good, and everybody got involved, and London Live TV came down. But it was quite an emotional thing for everybody. I was like, Christ! I thought it was just me, but a mate of mine was. Who was helping out was down there, and he said to so there was somebody early who was quite tearful. I said, I'm glad you've seen it, because people are seeing the wall and they're like, oh wow. So it was almost like the corpse of Bob had been brought back to life in a way, and that was quite special. And it was nice seeing it on the TV, and it kind of went full circle in a way. It had been documented.
I know that piece. It's just by the train station, and you come out there, and it's a powerful piece, and it really pays homage to a great man. And I suppose then people are looking at thinking, again, I suppose it comes down to pride, doesn't it? Pride in the community when they see something like that.
They've got the mural back. I remember on the first morning, I got the overgrain down from North London, and there's these like little white gates, because it's an overgrown. So, and I came wheeling out. I was covered in like my paint, kind of ripped paint jeans, and I had my paint suitcase. And there was this woman stood outside, and I went wheeling out, and she said, oh, excuse me. And I was like, yeah. And she said, oh, are you the guy that's come to paint the mural? And I was like, yeah. And she said, well, I said, how do you know? And it was really weird from the minute I got off the train. Wow. She was just having a cigarette, some old woman, and she went, are you the guy that's coming to bring back Bob? And I was like, yeah, I am. So it was kind of, even before I started painting, it was kind of, it was quite an interesting project, yeah.
And just one more, you've recently painted in London, in Hackney Wick. Yeah. I saw that the other day, part of London Mural Festival. How did that come about? And tell me about that piece.
Well, that was there's a company called, not a company, an organizer, I don't know how to describe themselves, Global Street Art, who do a lot of, involved in the scene a lot, and also do a lot of commercial stuff, but also a lot of murals. And the founding member of them got the London Mural Festival together, and which I think is a really good idea, because, even though we've had events in London, it's nice to have like an official street art festival, because I travel to other places where they have these very kind of well-known prestigious festivals. So it's nice, yeah. So he just I can't remember how I got involved. I know the guy anyway, and he'd help me out with a couple of walls and things. So yeah, I was asked to do that, and so I just was happy to oblige. Yeah.
It's a good spot, isn't it? And you painted one of your
it's a good spot. It's a hard spot though, because the mural doesn't start for about I don't know, like 10 meters
Oh yeah,
up.
it's high up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been in lockdown with my slippers on and my cats, so it was kind of bizarre going to the top of that wall, and the wind was hitting the top of the scissor lift, and I just was like, oh Christ, what have I got myself into? It's not really for the faint-hearted, you know, because I'm a bit scared of heights. So I hadn't painted since Miami last year, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire doing the London Mural Festival. And that second day where the machine was blowing in the wind, and I was like, oh God, just get me home.
Well, I doubt that piece is going anywhere anytime soon because it's so difficult to get to.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to get tagged.
No,
but I varnished it as well with some UV, so it should last. You know, it should last quite a good while. But yeah, it's not a very photogenic piece with the brickwork. It's a tough wall. It was a tough wall with the brickwork and the sun and the height. So yeah, but I've done it. I've survived. I crawled from the battlefield, tears in my eyes.
You did well. You did well, Dale. Thanks very much, mate. I'm gonna leave it there. Thanks for talking to us. I hope you have a great show. And yeah, speak to you.
Thank you very much.